I never imagined my life would unravel like this. It started with an innocent moment, a brush of hands, a lingering glance, but what I saw that night shattered every line we were never supposed to cross. Standing there, wrapped in nothing but a towel, I caught his eyes lingering in ways they never should have. My heart raced, but it wasn't fear that I felt, and that terrified me even more. I always thought our family was unshakable, rooted in love, loyalty, and trust. My brother, Ethan, had always been the steady one, the protector. When our parents passed away suddenly, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under us. Moving back into the family estate wasn't just about practicality, it was about survival. Ethan took charge, as he always did. At 32, he carried the weight of responsibilities like it was second nature. Even when I knew it wasn't easy for him. He was the glue holding everything together, the house, the paperwork, and me. I was 27 and lost, drifting between failed relationships and half-hearted career attempts. Being home felt like finding an anchor after years of drifting. The estate, with its stone walls and towering windows, felt heavy with memories. It was where we grew up, carefree kids playing hide-and-seek in the gardens and sneaking cookies from the kitchen. But those memories were ghosts now, echoes that reminded me of everything we'd lost. Ethan welcomed me back with open arms, his hug warm and strong, but I could see the exhaustion in his eyes. "We'll get through this," he said that first night, and I believed him. I wanted to be there for him as much as he was for me. Days turned into weeks, and we fell into an easy rhythm. Morning coffee on the terrace, evenings sorting legal documents, and late-night talks by the fire. He made me laugh even when I didn't think I could anymore, and for the first time in years, I felt safe. But then I started noticing things. The way his eyes lingered on me a second too long. The way his hand brushed against mine, and neither of us pulled away. At first, I told myself it was nothing, grief, nostalgia, misplaced comfort. But then came the night I stepped out of the shower and saw him standing there, his eyes betraying something I wasn't ready to name. I told myself it was just an awkward moment, a misunderstanding, but deep down, I knew something had shifted, and there was no turning back. It started as small moments, so subtle I could almost pretend they weren't real. The first time I noticed it, Ethan and I were sitting in the library, going through paperwork. He leaned closer to point out something on the page, and his arm brushed against mine. It should have meant nothing, but my skin burned where he touched me. I shook it off, blaming exhaustion or grief. But then it happened again. He handed me a glass of wine one evening, and his fingers lingered just a second too long. My heart skipped, and I pulled my hand away too quickly, spilling a few drops on the carpet. "Relax," he said with a soft laugh, grabbing a napkin. But his eyes didn't match the humor in his voice. I started to catch him watching me, not in the way a brother should look at his sister. His gaze lingered when I stretched to reach something or tucked my hair behind my ear. I told myself I was imagining it until the night in the kitchen. We'd been washing dishes after dinner, laughing about something trivial, when his hand brushed against mine. This time neither of us moved. My breath caught and I looked up. The humor in his eyes was gone, replaced by something heavier. I cleared my throat and stepped back, breaking the spell. "I'm going to bed," I muttered, barely able to meet his gaze. But the tension didn't go away. It only grew. One night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into the living room, wrapped in a blanket, and found him sitting by the fire with a glass of whiskey. He looked up when I entered, his eyes shadowed by the flickering light. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. I shook my head, sitting on the couch across from him. The silence stretched, and I felt the weight of his stare. "You okay?" I finally asked, breaking the stillness. His jaw tightened before he spoke. "I don't know," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Lately it feels like nothing makes sense anymore." I wanted to comfort him, to tell him we'd get through this, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I found myself staring at his lips, wondering what they'd feel like against mine. The thought terrified me. I shot to my feet, mumbling something about going to bed, and practically ran from the room. But no matter how much I tried to push it down, the tension only grew. The space between us felt smaller with each passing day, and I started to wonder if I was imagining it, or if he felt it too. Then came the night everything changed. I stepped out of the shower, my hair damp and a towel wrapped tightly around me, when I heard footsteps in the hall. Assuming it was Ethan heading to bed, I didn't think much of it, until I turned the corner and saw him standing there by the window. The lamp cast soft shadows, and for a moment, I thought he hadn't noticed me. But then he turned. Our eyes locked, and the air between us felt charged. heavy with something I couldn't name but knew I should run from. I clutched the towel tighter, my pulse racing. "Sorry," he said, his voice quiet. "I didn't mean to. I'll go." But he didn't move. Neither did I. "It's fine," I managed to say, though my voice shook. The silence stretched, and my heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Finally, he turned and left, but the moment lingered, haunting me long after he was gone. I wanted to believe it was nothing. A mistake. But deep down I knew it wasn't. And that terrified me most of all. The days that followed felt different, heavier, like the air was thick with something neither of us could name, but both of us felt. I tried to convince myself that the tension was in my head, that grief and stress had twisted my emotions. But then Ethan touched me again, and I knew it wasn't my imagination. It was a Sunday afternoon. The rain tapped softly against the windows, and we were sitting on the floor of the living room, sorting through old photo albums. I reached for a picture at the same time he did, and our hands brushed. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. Neither did he. Instead, his fingers curled slightly, holding mine for just a moment longer than they should have. I felt my breath catch, and when I looked up, his eyes were already on me, dark, searching, and far too intense. I yanked my hand back like I'd been burned. I need some air," I stammered, standing so quickly the album toppled off my lap. "Wait." His voice stopped me. It was low, almost pleading. I froze, my back to him. "What?" "Don't go," he said softly. "Please." I turned slowly, and there it was again, that look. I wanted to ask him what it meant, but I was too afraid of the answer. So instead, I left the room without another word. But the space didn't help. It never did. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment, the touches, the glances, the way his voice softened when he spoke to me. My skin still tingled where his fingers had brushed mine. I hated myself for wanting more. The next evening, it happened again. We were in the library, sipping wine by the fire. I couldn't focus on the book in my lap because I could feel his eyes on me. "You've been quiet," he said finally, breaking the silence. I swallowed hard. "I'm fine." "You don't seem fine." I looked up, and the room suddenly felt too small. "I don't know what you want me to say, Ethan." "The truth," he said, his voice steady but strained. "Tell me you don't feel it too." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Feel what?" He set his glass down and leaned forward, closing the space between us. "This," he said, gesturing between us. "Whatever this is. Tell me I'm wrong." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. "You can't, can you?" he whispered. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "We can't do this, Ethan. It's wrong." He exhaled sharply, leaning back like I'd slapped him. "I know it's wrong," he said. "But it doesn't change the way I feel." Neither of us spoke after that. The fire crackled softly, and I wanted so badly to believe that if I just walked away, this thing between us would disappear. But it didn't. The tension only grew stronger, pulling us toward each other like magnets. It was little things, the way his hand lingered on my lower back when he brushed past me, or how his gaze dropped to my lips when I spoke. Then came the night it finally happened. We were cleaning up after dinner, laughing about something stupid, when he reached to grab a plate at the same time I did. His hand caught my wrist and I froze. For a moment, neither of us moved. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Ethan," I started, but he stepped closer, his fingers trailing up my arm. "Tell me to stop," he said, his voice raw. I couldn't. Instead, I closed the space between us, and then his lips were on mine. It was soft at first, hesitant, almost as if we were both afraid to cross the line completely. But the moment his arms wrapped around me, pulling me closer, the dam broke. I should have stopped it. I should have pulled away. But instead, I clung to him like I was drowning, and he was the only thing keeping me afloat. When we finally pulled apart, I couldn't look at him. My heart pounded so loudly it was deafening. "I'm sorry," I whispered, stepping back. "This can't happen." He reached for me, but I turned and ran before he could touch me again. I lay awake all night, replaying the kiss over and over. It was wrong, everything about it was wrong, but I couldn't stop wanting it. The next morning, I avoided him. But when our eyes finally met across the breakfast table, I knew it wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The days after the kiss were unbearable. I avoided Ethan as much as I could, but in a house that big and empty, there were only so many places to hide. Every glance felt heavier, every touch more dangerous, and the air between us was thick with tension that neither of us knew how to break. I told myself it was a mistake. I repeated it like a mantra, trying to drown out the memory of his lips on mine, the way his hands had felt as they held me. But no matter how hard I tried, it wasn't enough. And then it happened. It was late, past midnight. I couldn't sleep, so I wandered downstairs, hoping a cup of tea would calm my nerves. I wasn't expecting to find Ethan sitting in the dimly lit living room, his head in his hands. He looked up when I entered, and something in his eyes broke me. "Ethan," I started, but he cut me off. "No, don't," he said, standing. "Don't pretend this isn't happening." I froze, clutching the edge of my robe. "What do you mean?" He stepped closer, his voice low and raw. "You know exactly what I mean. This us. It's not normal, and it's not okay, but it's real." My breath hitched. "You're my brother," I whispered, as if saying it out loud would make it easier to resist. "I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But it doesn't change the way I feel." Tears burned in my eyes, but I couldn't stop myself from closing the space between us. "We can't," I said again, even as I reached for him. But before I could say another word, the door creaked open. We jumped apart as our cousin, Lauren, stepped into the room. Her eyes flicked between us, narrowing as she took in the way Ethan's hand had just dropped from my arm. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Nothing," I said too quickly, my voice shaky. Her eyes lingered on mine, then shifted to Ethan. "Really? Because it sure doesn't look like nothing." I opened my mouth to protest, but Ethan stepped in. "We were just talking," he said, his voice calm, but there was an edge to it that made Lauren's eyes narrow further. She didn't believe us. I could see it in the way her jaw tightened. "Talking?" she repeated, crossing her arms. "At midnight? In your pajamas?" I swallowed hard, panic rising in my chest. "You're acting crazy," Ethan said, stepping forward. "Why don't you just—" "Don't," she snapped. "Don't talk to me like I'm stupid." Her voice echoed through the room, and my stomach dropped. The walls felt like they were closing in. Lauren's gaze shifted back to me, sharp and accusing. "How long has this been going on?" "Nothing is going on," I said, my voice breaking. But it was too late. I could see it in her eyes, she knew. She stormed out before either of us could stop her. I turned to Ethan, panic clawing at my chest. "What do we do?" He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room. "We can fix this," he said, but even he didn't sound convinced. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. "We're screwed," I whispered. And we were. The fallout started the next morning. Lauren didn't confront us directly, but the whispers started almost immediately. Family members began looking at us differently, their conversations cutting off whenever we entered the room. It didn't take long for Ethan to confront her. "You don't know what you think you know," he said, cornering her in the library. "Oh, I think I know exactly what's going on," she shot back. Ethan tried to reason with her, but it was no use. Lauren's accusations spread like wildfire, and soon the entire family was treating us like we were strangers. I tried to deny it. I told them it was just grief, that we were leaning on each other for support, but no one believed me. Not even Ethan. The worst part was that I couldn't even blame them. Because even after everything, after the rumors, the judgment, the shame, I still couldn't stop thinking about him. One night, when the whispers grew too loud and the stares too sharp, I found myself in Ethan's room, tears streaming down my face. "I can't do this," I sobbed. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me tightly. "We'll figure it out," he whispered. "No matter what it takes." But as I lay there in his arms, I knew there was no figuring this out. No fixing it. We had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The morning after Lauren's confrontation, the house felt different, colder, heavier. Whispers trailed us like shadows. No one said anything outright, but the tension was suffocating. I could feel their eyes on us during breakfast. My aunt barely looked up from her plate. My uncle's questions about the estate were short and clipped, like he couldn't wait to be done talking to us. Even the staff seemed quieter, avoiding eye contact. Lauren avoided me altogether. I overheard her talking to my cousin Emily later that day. "I saw them," she hissed. "They weren't just talking. I know what I saw." I wanted to scream, to tell her she was wrong, but I couldn't. Because she wasn't. That night, Ethan found me in the library. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. I swallowed hard. "What's there to talk about?" "They all know." "They don't know anything," he said sharply, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I stood, pacing the room. "You don't get it, Ethan. They don't need proof. The way we act around each other? It's enough." He grabbed my wrist, forcing me to stop. "I don't care what they think," he said, his voice raw. "I care about you." My chest tightened and tears burned in my eyes. "But it's not just about us anymore. It's about them. About this house. About everything we've built." He let go, stepping back like I'd slapped him. "So what? You're just going to pretend this never happened?" I shook my head. No. I'm saying we need to stop before we destroy everything. His jaw tightened. It's too late for that. And he was right. It was too late. The days dragged on, and the rumors only got worse. Friends stopped visiting. Relatives stopped calling. It was like we'd been exiled without anyone saying the words. Ethan started drinking more. Late at night, I'd hear the clink of glasses in the library, and it killed me knowing he was in there alone. I tried to stay away from him, but the distance only made it worse. The more I pulled back, the more I missed him. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I found him in the garden, sitting on the stone bench where we used to watch the sunset as kids. He looked up when he saw me, and my heart broke at the sadness in his eyes. I can't keep doing this, I said softly. Neither can I, he admitted. For a long time, we just sat there in silence, the weight of everything pressing down on us. I hate this, I finally whispered. I hate how it feels like I can't breathe when you're not around. His hand found mine, and I didn't pull away. Me too. But we can't keep hurting each other like this. He nodded, but there was no conviction in his eyes. The breaking point came a week later. Lauren finally cornered me when no one else was around. You need to leave, she said, her voice shaking. What? You heard me. Leave. If you care about this family at all, you'll walk away before you ruin it. Her words hit like a punch to the gut. Lauren. No, she snapped. You think no one notices? The way he looks at you. The way you look at him. Everyone sees it. I opened my mouth to argue, but the look on her face stopped me. She wasn't angry. She was scared. And that's when I knew. We couldn't stay. That night, I packed my bags. Ethan found me halfway through and begged me to reconsider. You don't have to do this, he said. Yes, I do, I replied, fighting back tears. Don't leave me, he whispered, and the sound of his voice almost broke me. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I finally walked out the door, it felt like my chest was being ripped open. Ethan didn't come after me. He just stood there, watching as I disappeared into the night. I wanted to look back, but I didn't. Because I knew if I did, I wouldn't be able to leave. The days after I left felt like I was walking through a fog. The silence was the worst part. No calls, no messages. Just the unbearable weight of knowing I'd left Ethan behind. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. I tried to rebuild my life, throwing myself into work and keeping busy, but nothing felt right. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake, replaying every moment we spent together. The stolen glances, the lingering touches, the kiss that changed everything. I told myself leaving was the right decision. It had to be. But the guilt never went away. Neither did the ache. One afternoon, weeks after I left, I got a text from Ethan. Just 2 words. I miss you. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, my heart pounding. I wanted to respond, to tell him I missed him too, but I didn't. Instead, I deleted the message and turned off my phone. Because the truth was, I did miss him. So much it hurt, but I couldn't let myself fall back into that spiral. Time passed, but the memories didn't fade. I thought about him every time I saw a sunset, every time I heard a song we used to listen to. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd wake up convinced I could still feel his touch. But I also thought about Lauren's words, the way her voice trembled when she begged me to leave. I thought about the look in Ethan's eyes that night, the desperation and heartbreak. I loved him, but love wasn't enough. Not when it came at the cost of everything else. Months later, I heard through family that Ethan had sold the estate. It was too big for him, they said. Too much for one person to handle. I wondered if that was true, or if he couldn't bear to live there without me. I tried to move forward, but a part of me always felt stuck in that house, in that moment. Looking back, I see now that what we felt wasn't love. Not the kind that builds lives and families. It was grief and loneliness, twisted into something dangerous and intoxicating. We clung to each other because we were afraid of letting go. But letting go was the only way to save ourselves. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that some lines aren't meant to be crossed. And no matter how much you want something, some desires come with a price too high to pay. Because the truth is, love shouldn't feel like a secret you're afraid to share. It shouldn't leave you drowning in guilt or questioning your own reflection. And if it does, it's not love. It's a warning. What would you have done in her place? Could you walk away from forbidden love, or would the temptation be too strong? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm dying to know what you think. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more shocking and emotional stories. Trust me, the next one will leave you speechless. Stay tuned, you won't want to miss it.